begin now. Okay, this is CSC161, the evening class. This is the evening of September the 17th. And tonight we're going to be looking at exception handling, and we're also going to be looking at how to read from and write to text files on this so you can save some information off out of your code when you need to. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do then is share my screen for Eclipse, and we'll start working on this. Okay, now, yeah, check by the screen, yep. Y'all should be able to see that now. And I have started a new project which I called Exception Handling. And in that project, I have created something called Null Pointer. And what this one is for is just to generate an exception that will cause the code to die. And then once we get that set up, then we can take a look at how to deal with that in a more successful manner. Okay, so I'm going to well, I need another object that I can try to instantiate. So I'm going to create another class here. I'm going to call it sample object. And I do not need public static void main in it. Okay, here is sample object, not a lot happening there. And it doesn't need much of anything in it. So let's see, I might throw in an int value. Let's start off at 10 and see if it's going to let me buy with that. Yep. Okay, so there's our sample object. Again, the whole idea of what I'm doing right now is to produce a critical error and have the code die so that we can start working with that. Okay, so let's see. To start with then in this, I'm going to set up an array of sample objects. So let's see, got to capitalize and everything the same way. So sample object, and we will create an array, and I will call that SO array for sample object array. And that's going to equal a new sample object array of 5 elements. Okay, one of the things to remember is just because you establish a place to hold an array doesn't mean you have anything in the array. So at this moment, that's exactly where we are. I've got a place to hold 5 sample objects, but I haven't put any of them in there yet. Okay, so what I'm going to do to throw the error, and I'll put that in here so it's obvious I'm intending to do that. And let's see, the following line will cause a null pointer exception, which in your coding career, you will see that a lot, okay? So I'm going to come in here and just simply say, okay, the first element of the array, so SO array sub 0, that's the first element of the array, dot, let's see, what am I going to do? What was that called, my value that was in there? Just value. Oh, okay, that was a hard one to remember. Okay, so I'm going to say that one's value is going to equal 15. Okay, and syntactically, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, however, since I have not placed a sample object into the array, and I refer to the location of where the first one would be, it's null. It says, no, there's nothing here, so you can't be telling me to do anything with it. So let's try to run this and make sure that this actually dies out like it's supposed to. And we have to go through and do both of them because they haven't been done before, and that's exactly what we're after. Okay, a null pointer. I have referred to a place that doesn't have anything in it. And so that means it's pointing at nothing, and that is a critical error that well, it just dies when it gets there. Okay, so we've got that set up. Now then, the whole idea of our exception handling is that we don't let this happen to our code. We don't want it to just flat out die. What we want to do is be able to find out about this error and produce some kind of a message that perhaps will help myself out a little bit in finding what went wrong when it occurs. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do this is work with something called the try and a catch block. We're going to try to do this command, and if something goes wrong, let's catch whatever it is that went wrong, and we will issue our own little message about this thing. So to do that in a try catch block, of course, it goes just exactly like it says, try, and then in curly braces, you put everything that might possibly be causing some kind of a critical error to occur. And we already know that ours will. So I'm going to try to do this, and it's not going to be successful. It will generate a null pointer exception. Okay, so anytime you have a try, that has to be followed by a catch block. Okay, and the idea is if there are any errors here, you're going to catch them and deal with them yourself. This thing's still not happy with me. Let me get a little more room for code, okay? Because in a catch, this isn't sufficient, okay? We have to say what we're trying to catch. And in this particular case, we're trying to catch and it says right down here, null pointer exception. That's exactly what we're trying to catch. So I'll say I'm trying to catch, if it occurs, a null pointer exception. Okay, and now then, just like I said, okay, here is a sample object, an array of sample objects, and I will call it SO array. Or just like I said in this one, here is an integer, and I will call it value. I've got to do the same thing with here is a null pointer exception, and you can call it any name you want to put there. In this case, NPE seems to be a very good name for it. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this particular command. If it fails, I'm going to see if I can catch it. It's probably going to fail with the null pointer exception. As a matter of fact, I know it will. Okay, so if that happens, instead of dying, this is what I would like you to do instead. Talking to the computer, this is what I want you to do. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to do a sysout, control space, and I'm going to print out some kind of a message. And in this case, null pointer exception, well, what does that actually mean? Well, in my case, that means that the SO array was not filled with sample objects. Okay, and so that's the message that I will give to myself instead. Let's see, let me save a little bit of space here so I can get a little more to look at when this thing runs. Okay, now I think we're going to be okay. And so when I run it, it's going to have me redo null pointer because I made changes to it. And instead of the code dying, the code finishes normally, and I get the SO array was not filled with sample objects. And then you come back and go, oh yeah, that's right. And you try to fill them with sample objects. Okay, so that's a try catch block. I'm going to come back now and do a little bit more with this to give you a little better feel for what's going on. We don't have to catch the exact exception. We can just say any exception that comes along, catch it. And I will call that exception that comes along E. What is the exception? It's all that red ink we got a while ago. That's what it's catching, is that all that red ink. And so I'm going to say, well, any exception that comes along, catch it, and we'll get, okay, so I'm going to run this again and see if this will work. And it does. All right, so it doesn't have to be the specific exception. You can put up here just any exception, catch it, and in this case, we know exactly what it's going to be, but in other cases, you might have 4 or 5 things up here that could go wrong, and you just catch the exception and do some message that this segment of code did not work correctly. anything's better than it just dying on you, okay? So that's one way that we control that, and that is a try and a catch block. Now, when we get to the second part of tonight, when we're working with disk files, there are more errors that can occur, such as you tell it to go open this file on disk and the file isn't there. Oh, that's an exception, and your code will die if you don't take care of that. And so we'll be applying this to some of the code we do here in a little bit. All right, any kind of questions come to mind on this?
Yeah, I have a question.
Please go for it.
What happens if you specify the wrong type of exception? Like you specify null pointer and instead it's like path not found or something?
Yeah, that's not a bad question right there. Let's see, what else could go wrong that I could cause to happen real quick? Trying to think of another exception, and I've got to get the spelling of the exception exactly right for this to work. What's some other critical errors we have seen? Yeah, hard to think of them right now, but when you're writing the code, they're all over the place out there. Let's see, with test item, could that have had anything that goes wrong? Testing. Most of the errors I'm thinking of at the moment will only be syntax errors, and they won't get us far enough to help. That's a good question. Since I can't think of anything offhand, then I know we're going to hit some other exceptions in a little bit. And when we do, then we'll try to catch a null pointer exception when that's not the one that's going on. So good question on that. We'll get an answer here in a couple of minutes. Okay, any other questions come to mind? Okay, well, let's expand on this a little bit. We don't have to stay with just the standard exceptions that's already built into Java. Depending upon what we're doing, we might actually come up with a situation where we want to throw an error that's not normally an error, but for our application, it should be considered an error. So we're going to come up with that. So let me create another class here. Okay, and on this next class, I'm going to, just because it's a fun name, I'm going to call it Roll Your Own. And this is going to be an exception that we are creating ourselves, okay? And on this one, let's see, roll your own exception. Yeah, I will not need a main in it. So let me click on finish. Let's see, let me put the name exception up here. I think that would be good too. Make it as clear as I can what that is that I'm working with. Okay, so no main on this one, so I'll click on finish. All right, now then, here's our object. Remember, classes and objects are the same thing in Java. So I want to create an exception, and I want it called roll your own exception. And so to do that, we're going to inherit. And we've looked at this before. This is an extends situation. Roll your own exception extends what happens in just a regular exception. Okay, so now then roll your own is an exception, but let's see what we're going to do instead. Okay, I just set up, just because this gets long if you don't, I'm going to set up public string, well, let's do, I got my cases backwards, public string, there we go, and I'll call it my message. And I'm going to set that equal to whatever message I'm going to put in here. And so I'll just put in, this is a message that would make sense if we knew why it was thrown. Okay, and close that quote and semicolon. And now then I have this nice long error message that I can use here in my code. Yeah, I think it's going to let me stretch it out that far. Okay, so at the end of that line then, I'm going to come down and say public. It's going to return a string, and it's going to be called get my message. And all it's going to do is return the message. We'll watch this thing work and the pieces will make a little more sense to us. Okay, so there's my exception. Okay, and I have one method within it called get my message. And when I get my message, it simply returns this nice long string that I put in up here. Okay, so let's go back to our null pointer. And there is a new exception that we can use. Okay, so whether it works well or not, after this try catch, I'm going to put another one, and I'm going to say try and open up curly braces. And it's giving me error because I've got to have a catch that goes with it. And so in this, I'm just simply going to say, I'm just going to tell it immediately, hey, throw an exception. And I want it to throw a roll your own exception. Okay, so what I get there, oh, there's supposed to be an open parenthesis there, and that didn't give it to me. Let me try again. Open, close. Okay, now we're there. Okay, let's see what this is complaining about. Well, for one thing, I spelt it wrong. Okay, so come back in and correct that. And now then you can do this. When I say new, that creates an instance of this class. And so at that point then, what I have is an exception that I can work with. And I'm saying throw that exception, okay? So when I do my catch block, and I'm going to try to catch, and right now I'll keep this working and then we'll start messing with changing the names and stuff. I'm going to see if I can catch a roll your own exception. Okay, now just like I did up here in that catch, I say what kind of exception it is and then give it a name. So I'm going to do the same thing here, and I'm just going to keep the same pattern. It works fairly well, just the initials of whatever the exception is, and it's a roll your own exception. Okay, so I'm going to try to catch that. And if I do, well, all I want is a message that came from it. Okay, remember we made that nice long message for this thing. And so this is a message that would make sense if we knew why it was thrown. Okay, that's what I want to get out of it. Well, roll your own exception has a method called get my message. And I have instantiated a roll your own exception, and I have called it RYOE. So I can now say, okay, go to that instance called RYOE dot, and here's all the things you can do. Okay, and here's one called get my message. And so I'm going to say that's what I want to do, and that's all I'm going to, oh, well, I got the message. Well, that doesn't do me any good though, because remember, just because you have it doesn't mean anybody gets to see it. So I actually need to print this thing. So let me see if I can get a sys out control space to work. There we go. And then straighten this little guy up a little bit. Okay, and I'll put another close parenthesis right there. Okay, so in my try block, I just did something that would immediately create an exception. I threw an exception. Okay, and so that got me a new instance of that particular class. and then I refer to that. Well, I catch it down here, and then I refer to that and say, okay, go get your message, bring it back to me, and then print it. So we're going to run this now and see, since this catches the error up here, my code should continue running, okay, which will let it come in here and have another exception, and that should be caught and my code should continue running. Okay, so let's check to see if this will work. Okay, and this time it needs to check the code in roll your own exception and the code in null pointer. We tell it okay. And both of those functioned correctly. So even though there's a problem up here, I could still continue with my code and check on other things. All right, so that one is just an exception that is known, and so we used a built-in one on that and said, okay, if anything went wrong, well, we'll just print out this message. Okay, now then, Kyle, I think it was you a while ago, asked what happens if you put the wrong name in here. So let's put the wrong name in here and see what happens. Okay, and I can't just put exception because roll your own exception is an exception. So I'll do the null pointer exception and see what it does. I'm not throwing null pointer. I caught that up here. I'm throwing a different exception completely. And notice that I've got a syntax error at this point. Okay, so RYOE doesn't quite cut it. Okay, well, we know why. It's because this isn't a roll your own exception up here, and that's what I was relying on. So I'm just going to comment that one out. And then instead of doing that, I'll just do another sysout of some kind. And I'll put the wrong type exception did get caught. And if it doesn't get caught, then this code is going to die. So let's run this down and see what we get. Ooh, something it didn't like. What does it not like up here? Let's look at this little message. Unhandled exception type, roll your own exception. So it is aware that I did not look for or catch the correct exception. Okay, well, what can you do with that? Well, one thing you can do, you can have more than one catch in a try. So let me put in another catch here. And I'm going to catch, in this case, a roll your own exception. Okay, now then, question, can I use RYOE again?
Yeah.
Why?
Because it's in a different place and you declared that inside the parentheses.
Yeah, it is a scope issue. RYOE exists only between this curly brace and that curly brace. And so I should be able to use it again right here. Okay, now then I've got to put a set of curly braces down here. Okay, and now then I can use this and take out the comment marks on it. Okay, now notice it no longer tells me I didn't catch that. Okay, so you can do individual catches for specific error, or not error codes, but exceptions from one try. And you can just keep stacking these as many as you want to do. So let me go ahead and run this again now. And what we're checking is to see if this null pointer exception gets caught, and it won't, but let's go see, let's go watch it run anyway. Okay, So in this try, the only exception that got thrown was a null pointer exception. Excuse me, was a roll your own exception. And so was there a null pointer exception? No, there was not. So this catch is ignored. Now I could come underneath this now and throw a new null pointer exception. And what is it not like? I may not can get to that. Yeah, unreachable code. That's going to throw an exception. So since that will throw an exception, I can never, ever, ever get to this line. And the compiler watches for that. Okay, so I can't set that up to do what I was hoping to. If this was an ifs or was looking for a particular condition, yeah, but there is no condition on this that will occur, which means anything else underneath this can never be reached. And so it'll tell you about it. All right, these are exceptions. Any questions on this one? Okay, then let's look at another exception that is a possibility in the lab that you're supposed to do this week. And so I'm going to create another Java class, and I'm going to call it input integer. Okay, and yeah, I need a public static void main on this one. Notice I'm putting two mains into this project. That can get interesting. All right, so straighten that up. All right, and all I'm going to try to do on this, let's see, if I'm reading from the keyboard, I need to import java.util.scanner, with capital S, scanner, okay. All right, now then I'll create a scanner. So a scanner, which I'll just call input, is equal to a new scanner tied to our system in. The default system input device is the keyboard. Okay. All right. Now then, sysout. Okay, and I'm going to do a prompt here, so I don't want it to drop down to the next line. And inside the parentheses, I'm going to put enter an integer value. Okay. Space. All right, so it stays on the same line. And now then I'm going to say, well, I'm going to do an input, so I need to hold this someplace, int, and I'd use that good old standard value again. Int value is going to be equal to input dot next. I think that's it. Excuse me, just input next, isn't it? Yep, input next. And that'll be a method call, so it needs parentheses to go with it. And what did I? Let me try that again. Is it just next? Next int? Nope. Oh crap. Okay, what's the method name to input a value? So it's going to be input dot next int. There it is right there. Okay. Now then I'll turn around and print it out. Okay, so sysout quote the value is space quote space plus value. Okay, real simple. Read in an integer, print it back out into code. And we're going to screw this up when we run it. Okay, so I'm going to take and make sure my focus of Eclipse is within this particular main before I tell it to try to run. But since it has two mains, you got to make sure it knows which one you're after. Okay, where did I change on null pointer? Oh well. Okay, this is running. Enter an integer value. Hello. There is another exception. I told it that it would be given an integer, and it wasn't. And it's coming back and saying, hey, you promised me an integer and I didn't get one, so I'm quitting. And that's what it does. So we have a new try catch. Okay. So I'm going to come up here, and wherever this error is occurring, well, let me just show you. I can do a bigger group than that if I want to. I can say try. Okay, so I'm going to try to do that. And obviously something can go wrong. And that is an input mismatch exception. So at the end of the try, I'm going to put a catch. And again, I could just put exception, but that's kind of lazy. So we're going to put exactly which exception it is. Input mismatch exception. Okay, and I will call that one input mismatch exception IME. And if I get that, well, the whole idea, what's it kicking about? Did I misspell it? EXCEPTION. Cannot be resolved to a type. Okay, that's a new one. Let me go ahead and finish my thought, and then I'll come back and fix that error, whatever it is. All right, so let's see. I'm going to catch that, and I don't want to just quit. I want to let the code continue if at all possible. I'm going to try to make the code as resilient as possible. So in this, I'm going to do sysout, and I'm going to print that was not an integer. Please try again. Oh, well, it helps also if I spell things. Okay. All right, now, let me figure out what I did wrong here. Java util dot input mismatch exception. I don't think I have to do that, but all right, let me try to work with that. Oh, wait a minute. We've seen this before. Oh, come on, give me fits. Okay, there it is. Import right there. And so in this case, I'm importing exactly what it wanted. So I go and say, okay, here's the exception that we're after. All right, and now then I have this try catch, and I'm going to try to run this and see what happens. Okay, so enter an integer value, and again, I'm going to tell it hello. But this time, instead of it dying, I get a nice little message that says, no, that wasn't an integer. Please try again. Well, this would work really swift if it's inside of a loop that keeps requesting integers and then printing them out. And so let's do that. Okay, I'm going to set up a Boolean through, and I'm going to set that equal to false. And on this, I'm going to say while it's not through. Okay, now then to just keep it more human readable, I'm going to do some indentation here. So I'm going to move that over. And then within the tries curly braces, I'm going to move that over. And now then it's getting to be a little more readable, especially if you already know a little bit of Java. Okay, so while we're not through, I'm going to try for an integer value. Now, right now, this is an endless loop because I don't have anything in here that will change this from false to true. So once I start running this, I'm just going to have to kill it myself. But we're going to give it a shot and see. So I've got all of my curly braces correct, and I'll come up here so I can have a little room down here. All right, let's try to run it again. I'll just say, where am I? Input integer. Okay, that's the right one. Okay, so I'll tell it hello. And now then enter an integer value. And I'm going to be a horsey and tell it no. That was not an integer. Please try again. Okay, so I'll give it 12.5. That was not an integer. Please try again. So essentially what I'm doing is setting this up to catch that kind of problem and go into a loop that, hey, it's going to stay there until you get the right kind of input to this thing. Okay, so when I do that, input.nextInt, then if it comes out okay, it will do this and not do the catch. So it's stopping on this line and dropping out, and it never does the system out println. Okay, well, what happens if I give it a correct value? Let me run it again and see that happen. Oh, I'm still in it. Okay, so I'll come in, I'll give it a 5. Hello. Oh, was I not down here in this? What am I stuck on? Where am I in my loop? This was going just fine. Oh, I clicked the red box, it stopped. Let me run it again. All right, and I'll give it 5. And now I'm still into a loop on this. Okay, enter an integer value. Okay, but I want to drop out of the loop, and I want to drop out whenever I do get a good solid value. So to do that, I'm going to change this and say THROUGH equals true. So now then, notice a little red box over here. My code is still running. So I'm going to stop the code, run it again, and make sure it works okay. It appears to be. Okay, so I'll tell it, okay, here's you an integer, 25. And it says the value is 25, and then the code stops. Why? Because if I can get past that line, I print out the value and I set up the trigger so that it will stop now at this point. Because this is now true, I come back around and I'll say while not true, well, not true is false, in the same way that not false was true. And so anyway, this makes the while loop stop. And that's one way to deal with, I have to have an integer here, make sure it's an integer so that my code does not die. All right, question.
So I noticed that if you run the code again and you don't enter an integer the first time, I noticed that it actually, I don't think that it'll ever get out of the loop because you didn't clear the input in the catch statement.
Right in through here. Let's go find out. Okay, good point. Okay, enter an integer value, and I'll give it 12.5 again. That was not an integer. Please try again. So this time I'll give it 5. No, it finishes out okay.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I understand what you're thinking on it, but this was all within the while, so it did get done. All this has to do is the resetting would need to be somewhere outside in what you're thinking. I probably am off a line or two on what you're thinking, but anyway, I understand.
No, that's right. I was just, usually when I do something like this, I just integer.parseInt input.next. That's usually what I do instead of input.nextInt.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we're going to play with in a minute, is the trouble you can get into doing next int, and next line. You have to be careful when you mix those things. Okay, so let's see, and it's giving me this one warning because I never did close that. And so if I will come down here, oh, let me see where I am. Yeah, that would be right. If I would come down here, I can say, well, no, I can't either. Input dot, and it's going, wait a minute. I don't know what input is. Why? Because it was declared within the try block. And so it only exists within the try block. It's too late to try to close it out here. The only way I can close this thing is going to be to do it within the try block. And this will be one of the things that drives you nuts is when you start working with this and you get a lot of code in there, there'll be some of these variables that you need out here. And as a result, you're going to have to make them global, or at least global within main. So little things to watch for. The suggestion that was being made just a while ago is, yeah, there's other ways to go through and get an integer other than this. But today's topic is exceptions and how you can make use of them. So this is one of the ways you can do that. Okay. Let's see, good comments. And we checked on the comment. What happens if you don't catch the right one? Well, it'll let you know. Okay. Are we good on this one?
Yep.
Okay. All right. That's the first topic for tonight is working with try catch for exceptions. And remember, you can always make your own exception if you don't find one that that serves the purpose that you need it to. So you can create your own if you would like. Okay, so I'm going to close all of these. Whoops, I modified it. Okay, input integer. I guess I was messing around with this. Let me run it one more time and make sure everything is taken care of before I close them. Okay, 5, and it should quit. Yep, okay. Now then, let me try to close all these. Okay, and I'm going to pull that up and pull that up. All right. What we're going to look at next is how to read and write, or write and read text files onto the drive. These are useful when you have some values that you need to come back to later, such as whenever you have a game, you can do a pause on and leave it and come back later and pick up where you left off. It's through this kind of stuff that that can happen. All right, so I'm going to create a new Java project, and I'm just going to call this one text files. Now, there are other files other than text files that you can save, and the syntax for it is a little bit different. But if you know what the other files are, you should be good in doing a little Google search to find out what your syntax actually is. Okay, so now then, again, since there's multiple projects going on, I'm going to select where I want this next Java class to go. And I'm going to call this one write data. Okay, and yes, I'll need a public static void main. Okay. Why didn't the public static void main show up? Okay, tab, public static void main, open in parentheses. Shoot, it's an array. It's a text array. What do they call that? Now, let me look at one of the others real quick. Shoot. Let's see. Source, no, sample object. No. Input integer. That'll do it. Oh, it's just a string array and call it whatever you want to. Okay. Main string array, and normally called args. And there is a way to work with that array. And when you call this to be, when you call the program to run, you can hand it variables externally from outside the program, you can hand variables in here. And when you do, it goes into this array of strings, and you can go through them looking for whatever it is you need. Okay, so let me set that up. Okay, good. It's a little bit happier now. Okay, we're going to write data. Now, here's the thing on this. Usually, I would set this up and have it be where you read something from the keyboard and write it to disk, and read something from the keyboard and write it to disk. But we're going to go through and do this, create over and over and over several times. And when I write the code that way where you're reading from the keyboard, well, every time you run this, you have to re-enter all that blame data again. So instead of doing that, I'm going to come in here and just key it in, hard code it, and let it write out. So let's just go ahead and get this in here. Let's see, we're going to do file, and I'll call that file, and that's going to equal a new file called, in parentheses, scores.txt, and this is exactly how you name your file. Now, what do I have? Oh, I did a single instead of a double. There comes Python again, biting me in the butt. Okay, now a couple of problems here. One is that it doesn't know what a file is. So what do? Well, we do that. Okay, so we've got that taken care of. Now then, let's see, with this, I'm going to say, okay, if, and file, which is now defined, .exists, okay, and you can ask about that. Okay, so if the file exists, and that's a method call, well, I want to do the following. So I'll come underneath here and put some curly braces. And as this goes, I am expecting a few errors to show up, like why the heck did that stuff not line up, and where did that come from? Okay, so back into this. If file exists, oh, I know why, because I need another close parenthesis up there. Okay, here's what I want to do. So that means I'm going out there to create a file, but I'm checking to see by any chance is it already out there? And if it is, well, maybe I don't want to destroy that file. So I'm going to do a message, sysout, and I'm going to say, quote, exiting without creating a new file. Okay, and I want some more on this, which is a file already exists. Okay, so I want to say, no, sorry, it's already out there and I'm trying to be safe, so I'm just going to quit right now. And the way you do that is to say system.exit. And in parentheses, you put a value. We don't normally put that in there because the Java figures out when it's through. And when it's through, it returns an exit code. And the exit code for a normal ending of a program is 0. Well, I'm not giving it a 0, I'm giving it 1 because this is not the ending that I wanted to see out there. And why do I have 2 sets of parentheses? I think I'm getting all kinds of help from clips tonight. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do if the file exists. Okay, and once you do system exit, that's it. There will be no else. There will be nothing else. Your code quits right there. Okay, so if the file doesn't exist, I get past system exit and I make it to this line. So if I make it to line 13, it's not already out there. Okay, so I'm going to say, all right, print writer, which it doesn't know what that is either. Okay, and I'll call it output is equal to a new print writer, W-R-I-T-E-R, and I want to tie it to a disk file. And the disk file I want to tie it to is this one up here. And just to make it easier, and I don't have to hunt through the code for the name of the file, I just defined it up here at the top. And so I can just say, that file. Okay. Now, at this point, let me pull in my thing that's needed for that. So I'm going to import print writer. Okay. And this is giving me fits over here, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. Okay, so I'm acknowledging this red X is here. I'll come back to it. Okay, so once this is working, then I can say output dot print, and this is going to go right to this scores.txt file. And in this, I'm going to say, okay, the first thing up is John T. Smith. Okay. Write that out there, and I'll put a space after Smith, okay, because that's a print. And then I'll say, oh, I hit enter, it didn't buy it. Okay, output dot, now then that's the end of my line. So I'm going to say print ln. And after John Smith, I'm going to print the value 90 and drop down a line. So let me open up, I got that, yeah, okay. I'm going to open up Notepad, and I'm going to share that screen with you. Okay, so, oh shoot, I just covered up everything. Come here, Notepad, I don't need you to be that big. Okay, thank you. Now let's move up out of the way, all right. And get back to this little guy, and I'm going to do a new share of Notepad. And this is what I have written out to disk, okay, is John T. Smith space 90 return. Y'all okay with that? This is a print command. Don't drop down a line. Stay right where you are. John space T space Smith space, close the quote, output, write this, and then drop down a line. 90, drop down a line. And so I'm creating a text file, one little line at a time. Okay, so let me go back now to my code. Okay, and so at the end of this line, I need a semicolon. And again, usually I would have gone into a loop that says, give me the name, give me the value, do you want to do some more, yes or no? Give me the name, give me the value, do you want to do some more, yes or no? But when you have to do this multiple times, boy, that gets old. So I'm going to put out 1, 2, 3, 4 lines into this file. That was one, and it takes 2 lines of command to create that 1 line of text. So there is 1, and I want a total of 4 lines. There's 2, 3, 4. So now then I'll come back and make some changes. The second name is not going to be John T. Smith. The second name is going to be Eric K. Jones. And no K on the Eric there. And the value with Eric Jones is 85. Okay, the third name is going to be Flicka a horse. Okay. And that and Flicka's value is 93. Has nobody ever heard of Flicka?
I have.
My friend Flicka? Never mind. Okay, the last one, maybe you will have heard of this one. And I'm going to call the last one Lassie a dog. Surely you've heard of Lassie. Okay, and Lassie made 83 on this, or has a value of 83. Okay, now that's it. I'm through. So at this point, I wish to tell the software I'm through creating this file. Please go place it on disk, close it up nice and neat. It will be available when I get there. Okay, so to do that, I say output dot close. Okay, that again is a function. at this point, one of the things I've worked with my classes on is that the code is never directly tied to the keyboard. There is a buffer in between. As I type, it fills the buffer. Code pulls what I'm typing from the buffer. Okay, same thing with writing to a disk file. Your code is not tied directly to the disk file. What it's tied to is the buffer that's between them. So if I'm writing to the disk file, all this stuff is going to the buffer. And believe me, the buffer is a lot bigger than this little bit of information. So at this point, when I'm through, all of that is still sitting in the buffer and has yet to be written out to the disk file. So when I say output.close, one of the things that Java does is go to the buffer and flush it on out to the disk and then close up the disk. So keep in mind there's a buffer in between on this stuff. Okay, so I've closed it, and I shall issue a message to the user to let them know. And I'm going to say file written successfully. Okay. Now, again, I'm acknowledging this error, and we're going to get to it here pretty quick. Okay. So first of all, I say, all right, set up a file, a place big enough to hold a file, and create it, and it's going to be scores.txt. And whenever I refer to file, I'm referring to scores.txt. Now, before I do anything else, does that file already exist? If it does, I'm not going to destroy it, because if I don't check for this and I just tell it output and tell it the name of the file, if that file's already out there, the code will go destroy it and recreate it. Okay, so that's something you have to decide in the flow of your system. Do you want that to just automatically be overwritten every time? And if you do, then don't check on the file exists. Okay, just say, all right, I'm creating it again, and the operating system will go out and delete it and restart it fresh. So that's this lines 9 through 13 just depends. Do you want to destroy it if it's already out there? Okay, so now then I'm going to go write this, and I'll add 1, 2, 3, 4 lines to it, and then I will close it and say I wrote successfully. So what is this? Well, anytime that you write to a disk file or read from a disk file, there is the potential problem that something went wrong outside of Java. And if that happens, then that Java itself will be informed, and it will throw an exception, which you have to do something about. Okay, well, that means that on this one, on main, one way I can deal with this is say, hey, here's main, and within main, it is possible that main is going to throw a java.io.io exception. Here's another type of exception. And what that means is that it's possible I'm going to be working with something outside of my code, and it could go wrong. And if it goes wrong, okay, I am aware of that. Notice I don't have to do a catch block on this. Okay. So now it's kind of hard to throw this when I'm creating it. We're going to have some code here in a little bit that reads it back in. And in that particular case, it's a lot easier to get an IO exception. We'll create it then and watch what happens. Okay, so this down here is no longer related, so I'm going to clear out my console area down here. Okay, now, where's this going to go? Well, first of all, you have to know where the code itself is going to be stored. Okay, and you choose that every time you launch Eclipse, you tell it what folder to put its work in. Okay, so I'm going to go to that folder, and I know on my machine where I put it. So I'm going to go into this, and I'm keeping it in the folder for this class. Let's see, I want to make sure I'm on drive C, because I've got some backups here. Okay, drive C, CSC161, and I have sample code for class, And if I go into it, you can see right there are all of the Java projects that I have started. And the one I'm working on right now is text files. Okay, so in this, this is where your package explorer over here is getting all this information. Okay, if I will look in the source, well, there's my write data.java. That's my code. And I'm not going to do it because I'm working on the code right now, but you can right click and open that with WordPad and see the code. And when you're through with it, you can save it back off. You can write your Java code just like that. It's just kind of nicer if you're using Eclipse, because Eclipse tries to help you write the code. Okay, so anyway, this is where all of the information is for this project I'm working on. Let's take a look at bin. And this is your code, not quite in executable form because it's not in machine language. This has been translated into Java bytecode. And it's the JRE, the Java Runtime Environment on your machine, that knows how to take the Java bytecode and turn it on into machine language for the particular computer that you're on. And let's take a look at that, see if I can get it to open with. Do I not have a, well, here's Notepad++. This is going to look funky, so I'll just take Notepad++ on this and see what I get. Okay, no, I don't want to download it. That's what your Java bytecode looks like. Oh, you can't see that. Let me change my share. Where did I put that? Notepad, WordPad, that's not it. Exception handling, it's here somewhere. Oh, there it is. Okay, found it. Now I'm going to share it. Anyway, that's what it looks like. There's a little bit of it that's readable, but mostly this is in, this is kind of a mixture of our English plus the code for the byte codes, and those are not regular ASCII characters that you can print. Okay, so that's why it looks funky like that. Let me close that so that it doesn't, oh shoot, okay, there we go. Go back into screen sharing, and let me go back to my, where am I, exception handling. I would like, yeah, that's the right one. Okay, I'm sharing this folder now, so let me go through this again. Okay, this is on my drive C, and I've created a folder for this semester, and in that folder I created a folder for this class. And in this class I have created, when you turn in your homework, this is where I download it and try to run it from here. Okay, sample code for class, this is where I keep all the Java projects that we have started in here. And here's the one we're working on now, text files. And in text files, there is the source code, and that'll show any of the .java files that you have there, such as, let me go back up a couple of levels. And we were just looking at exception handling. And if I go in there and look at the source, there's all of the different Java files that we created. And again, any of these you can open with something like WordPad, Notepad++ if you want to, and you can see the Java code that you wrote. It's just a text file. That's all it is. Oh, share that particular WordPad, Notepad, that's the one I'm after, I believe. Okay, and share this, and now you should be able to see, yeah, that was all we put into our sample object, which is an integer value equal to 10. Okay, so again, you could use a Notepad and write Java code. The only problem, again, is it doesn't tell you if you're making syntax errors. It doesn't help you out. It doesn't do anything for you, but you can sure do it. Okay, so now let's try to get back into our code. Share my screen, get out of the way. Java, I think this is it. And let me check on and see what's coming up. Yeah, that's the right one. Okay, so anyway, back to the print writer. it's going to try to create a disk file. It's always possible something could go wrong, and if it does, that's an IO exception. So I can just simply say up here, yeah, I know it does that, and it'll be happy. Okay, so I'm going to try to run this. Notice how confident I am in everything. Oh, look what it's running. You got to remember to click where you want it to click. Okay, that's the last code that worked. Let me clear that off again. Okay, so I'm going to be in here. Okay, now then that I have brought Eclipse's focus to this particular file, let's try to run again. Okay, write data. And so apparently the file was written without a problem. Well, let's go check and see. Okay, I'm going to open up my file browser, and so I've got to share that one. Okay, so sharing, and that, make sure I get the right one. Yep, that's it. Okay, so share that one. All right, and again, we are into sample code for class exception handling. Well, no, the one we're working on right now is a little bit different than that. It is text files. And if I will take a look, this didn't used to be there. Okay, so this is where this text file was created, and it is just, it's treated as a .txt file because that's how I named it. So if I double click it, it'll just automatically pop up Notepad, and let me share the Notepad and show you what happened with it. Scores. Yep, that's it, and share. Okay, so here is the text file that we created from our code. I can come in here and modify this stuff. I can add another line to this if I want to. It really doesn't matter how it's created, just be consistent in how you create it. Okay, so going to close that back out. Well, let me go ahead and reshare my code for class. Okay, that one is sharing. Okay, now I don't want to leave that Notepad open because that can cause me problems when I try to recreate this thing. So let me get rid of that. No, don't save. Okay, do I still have one? Yeah, I've got one more to go. Okay, now, because if another software package has the file open and this goes out to try to rewrite the file or do something, well, okay, you got a conflict between two pieces of software then. Okay, so that file has been created. Well, what happens if I try to just turn around and run this again, which I'm going to, maybe if it'll let me. Where am I on this thing? Okay, so make sure I have the focus right here, and we'll try to run it. Okay, and now it's telling me, no, that file already exists. I'm not doing anything, see ya. And so this does check to see if the file exists, and if it does, warns you and exit. So what if I want to create this again? Then I have to pull up a file browser, go back into it and delete the file out before I can run this again. Okay, that is writing to a disk file. Okay, now then let's take a look at reading back in from a disk file. Okay, so I'll create a new Java class. Yep, y'all seeing that, so that's going okay. And on this class, I want to read the data, not write the data, but read it. So I'm going to say, okay, now what? Did I confuse it? I want to give it a name. It's not letting me. Okay, let me just try to cancel that. Oh, good heavens. All right, Eclipse, I confused it somehow. So let me just see if I can get it to quit. Let's see, down here at the bottom, there's the Eclipse, and I can try to exit out from there. And I don't know if it's going to let me do that either. Okay, tell you what I'm going to do then. While I'm working on this problem, I'm going to stop the recording. I'm probably going to have to, well, I think I can I don't think I'll have to reboot my computer to get it straightened out. But what y'all are seeing right now is a problem with Eclipse itself. And somehow or other, when I opened this up and I went and clicked on something else and came back, it got lost. And it really doesn't know where I am or what's going on right now. So let me stop the share. Well, no, I can always get out of other stuff. Okay, now that I've stopped the share, and it's still not letting me stop this. Maybe it'll let me cancel it now. Ah, it did that. Okay, so got that going. All right, before I pull y'all back into it, I'm going to check and make sure it's going to let me create a new class. Yeah, it is. Okay, so I'm going to go back in and share this again now. Whew. I've had it be so bad, I literally had to restart the machine to get it to snap out of it. Okay, so back to my Java screen. Okay, now in here, it's doing it again. Okay. One more time, let's try this. A new Java class. Okay, now then will it let me give it a name? No, it won't. Okay, so I'm going to quit sharing so that I can get that done. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share again, and behind the scenes back here, I'm going to try to get all that straightened out. Okay, so a new Java class, and I'm going to call this one read data. And yes, I need a public static void main. And finish, and okay, that happened. So let me pull everybody back into this screen. Okay, screen share and that code and share it. Okay, so we've got the read data going now. There's going to be several things I need to import. We'll bring them in one at a time as we go. Okay, so there's my main, and I'll straighten that out. I might straighten that out. Okay. I'll share another one. I came prepared for this one tonight. Okay, so I'm going to do a new share, and I'm going to do text file document. Ah, yay. All right, let me make that bigger so that we can all read it. And no, that's a little bit too much. Thank you. Still a little bit much. Okay, we'll go with that. Okay. Create a disk from the information hard-coded in the program. Okay, there was the one that we just did. Now, one difference in what I did and what these notes show is take a look at lines 11 and 12. I couldn't comfortably let the line run that long because it wouldn't show up right. So I did one of the things you're allowed to do. I started with the string and closed it. Then I did a plus and reopened the string and finished it out. Okay, so that's just another way you can do it. If these get too long, you can drop down in between. All right, here's our read data. Okay, and I'm going to let this sit. Again, if you need to, whenever I get the video transcribed and everything and send it back out to you, you can come and pause it on this so you have time to key stuff in. All right. Here are the different imports we're going to wind up needing. We're going to be working with the file. It will throw an IO exception. Need to be reading, so I'm going to use a scanner to read with. And that we've already worked with tonight, and that's in there just to show you what happens with it. Okay, so we're going to read data, public static void string args, and it throws an IO exception, and y'all saw in the prior code that that's required. So here's my big try block. Scores.txt scanner is input. And it's a new scanner, and instead of tying it to system in, I'm tying it to scores.txt. So this now sets up a buffer between the file on disk and the Java code, the scanner, the scanner will be reading from the buffer. At this point, the computer system has already gone out and checked to make sure that that file is there, has opened it, and has filled in the buffer with the data from that file. Okay, so now then, while input dot has next, and that just allows it to look in the buffer and make sure there still is something in the buffer. And if there's still something in the buffer, then I'm going to do this. I'm going to go get the next thing out, which is the first name. And notice it doesn't get the whole name. I don't have a read of any kind that will go get the name and stop before the, okay, so I've got to read it in a piece at a time. First name, middle initial, last name, next, next, next. Then I go get input dot next int, and that goes into score. Then I can turn around and print it out. First name, middle initial, last name, and score. And I do that while there's still stuff in the buffer. Now this works only because I made critically sure that each line had a first name, a middle initial, and a last name, space, score. If it runs into any line where that doesn't match up, then you've got a problem. Because remember, it's not saying the disk file, it's not saying the way it looks when we pull up Notepad. It's just saying what's next in the buffer, what's next in the buffer, what's next in the buffer. Get me the next integer, which better be the fourth item in the buffer. So you do that for, this would go 4 times because we have exactly 4 lines out there. Then you close it. And you say, okay, that's it. That's the end of data from the file. Unless something goes wrong and you get an IO exception. Well, what can the IO exception be? Well, the file doesn't exist. That's the only thing that can go wrong. But what if somebody didn't have a middle initial? And so I read Joe, whatever his name was, and 90. And then I read Flicka, and Flicka didn't have a middle one, so it just said Flicka, and middle initial became horse, and last name, it goes out and gets an 83. Then the next thing up, it says next integer. Well, the next thing up is Lassie. Here's where your mismatch will occur. If something like that happens, if a line has any piece missing, this is going to just have a fit. Okay, so if I get an input mismatch exception, then I'm going to print out data type input does not match expected data type, drop down a line. Possible missing field in a line of input, which is the most likely thing to have gone wrong. And that was what I was going to illustrate to you if we could have actually got this keyed in. All right, so here's using input mismatch exception and trying to give a message. You take a look at it. Why is that going to happen? Well, about the only thing that can happen is there wasn't 4 items on the line. That'll throw it off. All right, now then, somebody ask a question. Okay, then we have covered all of the material that was supposed to be covered tonight. And I'm going to stop the recording here, and then we'll take a look at the assignment and make sure we all understand what I'm asking you in the assignment. So I'm going to stop the recording now.